The chamber was quiet now, but the tension in the air was thicker than ever. The human had faced challenges of mind, courage, and survival, yet the Queen's eyes, sharp and glimmering, showed that her patience was wearing thin. This was the final stage of the trial, the one designed to test not only the human's intelligence and courage, but his ability to influence the hearts and minds of others. The council was gathered, their forms looming in shadows and flickering light, watching intently. Every gaze seemed to pierce him, yet he stood tall, knowing that the culmination of all his previous trials had prepared him for this moment. The Queen's many eyes blinked in unison. "This is the ultimate test," she hissed. "You will face a choice. One path will grant you personal safety, but betray your species and your ideals. The other will put you at extreme risk, yet could inspire change not just for your people, but for all who suffer under oppression. Choose wisely, human. Your answer will define your fate and the fate of many." The human inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on him. He knew this moment was different. Every choice, every word, every action in this trial would be remembered, not just by the council or the Queen, but potentially by countless worlds. Fear surged through him, yet it was tempered by clarity. He had survived the impossible before, not because he was strongest or fastest, but because he stayed true to his mind, his values, and his courage. The simulation, or perhaps reality, shifted before him. A colony of humans, along with other species, appeared under threat from the Dominion's forces. The Queen's voice echoed in his mind. "Save yourself and your species suffers. Risk everything and they may thrive. What will you do?" He looked at the frightened holographic or maybe real figures below him. Their eyes mirrored hope, fear, and expectation. He knew what had to be done. "I will not abandon them," he said, his voice unwavering. "Even if it costs me everything, I will act to protect those who cannot defend themselves." The Queen hissed, her irritation rising. "Bold words, little human, but words are not enough. You will now act. Survive as long as you can. Lead, guide, and protect. Show me that your mind and your courage can stand against the Dominion itself." Without warning, the chamber transformed into a vast battlefield. Alien forces, some like monsters he had never imagined, some mechanical and enormous, advanced toward the colonies. The human's mind raced. He had no armies, no weapons, yet he remembered every lesson from the trials, the power of observation, of strategy, of inspiring others. He spoke to the humans and allied species around him, coordinating their movements, offering guidance, and showing where to hide, where to move, and when to act. He ran through the chaos, dodging attacks, pulling injured individuals to safety, and using his quick thinking to turn obstacles into protection. Every narrow escape, every clever maneuver, reinforced the lesson he had been teaching the council. Humans survived through intelligence, courage, and ingenuity, not sheer strength. The council watched in stunned silence. The Queen hissed in frustration. "Impossible," she said. "A human, controlling outcomes without weapons, outmaneuvering trained forces. How can this be?" Some council members leaned forward, whispering among themselves. "Observe closely," one said, its tone trembling. "The human is changing the balance. His influence spreads without force, yet it is undeniable. His species, underestimated for centuries, yet capable of shaping events far beyond their size." Hours passed, though time seemed distorted in the chaos of the battlefield. The human moved tirelessly, guiding the allies, calming panic, and making split-second decisions. The simulated or real enemies were relentless, but the human's ingenuity, combined with the willingness of others to trust and follow his guidance, began to turn the tide. Slowly, what seemed impossible became probable. The colonies survived attacks that should have destroyed them. Panic transformed into organized resistance. Fear was replaced with hope. And all the while, the human led without domination, without cruelty, relying only on strategy, communication, and courage. The Queen's multiple eyes narrowed, watching the unfolding events. Her ancient mind, accustomed to brute power and absolute obedience, struggled to comprehend what she saw. She had expected a failure, a human crushed by circumstances. Instead, she saw resilience, intelligence, and leadership, proof that humans could wield influence in ways no empire had accounted for. Finally, the battle subsided. The colonies had survived, the enemies had retreated, and the human stood among those he had guided, exhausted but unbowed. The council members exchanged glances, and even the Queen's hiss was quieter, tinged with something akin to begrudging acknowledgement. "You have done more than I expected," she admitted, her voice tight with frustration. "You have survived impossible trials, led others without weapons, and challenged assumptions that have lasted centuries. Few beings could accomplish what you have. But know this, your influence is dangerous. You are a threat not because you are strong, but because you inspire. That is, something I cannot simply destroy." The human nodded, breathing heavily. "I do not wish to destroy. I wish only to help, to teach, and to show that courage and intelligence matter even when the odds are impossible. My goal is not conquest, but understanding and survival for all species." A silence fell over the chamber. Some council members murmured quietly, acknowledging the truth in his words. Others studied him with new respect. A few whispered of change, of possibility, of hope. The human had achieved something the Dominion had not expected. He had shifted perception, not by violence, but through courage, intelligence, and compassion. The Queen hissed softly, pacing in thought. She realized that the human's trials were not just about testing an individual. They were about proving a new truth, that even the smallest, weakest species could stand against oppression, influence outcomes, and inspire change. Her centuries of power and control had faced a challenge that could not be crushed by force alone. "You have survived," she said finally, her voice carrying across the chamber. "And in doing so, you have forced even the Council to reconsider assumptions about your species. You are remarkable. But remember, the galaxy is vast and danger is everywhere. Your trials have ended here, but the journey of humanity is only beginning." The human, exhausted yet proud, nodded. "I understand, and I am ready for whatever comes next. Not because I am stronger than others, but because courage, thought, and integrity cannot be destroyed." As the council dispersed, the human looked around. He had proven his species' worth, not through conquest or fear, but through qualities often dismissed as weak. Intelligence, courage, compassion, and the willingness to act in the face of danger had turned a moment of trial into a victory. The Queen, watching from her throne, could not deny it. Humans were extraordinary. And in the quiet that followed, he realized a profound truth. The greatest weapon in the universe was not fire, nor claws, nor fleets. It was the human mind, combined with courage and heart, able to change perceptions, influence outcomes, and inspire even the most powerful beings to reconsider what was possible. The trials had ended, but the impact of one human standing firm would echo throughout the Dominion for centuries. The colonies were safe, the Council's assumptions were challenged, and a single species, underestimated for so long, had proven that size and strength were not the only measures of power. The human exhaled, exhausted but triumphant. He had raised his hand when asked, spoken truth when fear pressed close, and faced trials that should have broken him. And in doing so, he had changed the minds of beings far older, stronger, and wiser than himself. The Queen's hiss faded, replaced by silence. The Council had seen it too. Humanity was not to be dismissed, underestimated, or ignored. They had survived, endured, and inspired. And the human knew deep down that this was only the beginning. He stepped forward, no crown, no weapons, no army. Only courage, thought, and unwavering belief in the value of life, truth, and action. And in that moment, the galaxy seemed to pause, acknowledging that a single human, a small hand raised in defiance, could change everything. The trials were over. Humanity had been proven, and the universe, vast and endless, had seen what it had never expected: the quiet, enduring, unstoppable power of a human mind. The chamber where the council gathered was even more intimidating than the throne hall. The floor was polished and reflective, showing every movement with eerie precision. The ceiling disappeared into darkness far above, and the walls seemed alive, shifting with patterns of light and shadow. The human stood at the center, small, fragile, yet unbowed, feeling the weight of 1,000 alien eyes upon him. The council members, creatures of unimaginable shapes and sizes, observed him without a word. Some had arms that floated in the air, independent of their bodies. Some had heads that rotated like satellites, each eye glowing with intelligence. Some had forms that humans could barely comprehend. The Queen, still towering over him from her elevated throne at the edge of the room, hissed sharply, "Speak, explain yourself. Why do you believe your words have value?" The human took a deep breath. His voice echoed through the chamber, surprisingly steady despite the fear gnawing at his stomach. Because every species has the right to think, to speak, and to grow. Words can change minds, inspire courage, and prevent mistakes that weapons cannot. A ripple of surprise moved through the council. One elder, a creature whose body looked like liquid crystal with eyes floating within, leaned forward. "And you think your fragile species, barely able to survive its own planet, can influence empires?" "I do not claim to influence empires yet," the human said calmly. "I only claim that ideas are stronger than fear. Even the smallest mind can illuminate truth that the largest cannot see." The chamber was silent for a moment. Then another council member, a massive figure with scales like molten metal, rumbled a laugh that shook the floor. "You speak of courage and truth, little one. Yet you are alone here with nothing but your words. How do you expect to survive this council unarmed, unprotected?" The human looked around the room, meeting each gaze without flinching. "Survival is not my only goal. Understanding, communication, and change are stronger than survival alone. If you listen, you might learn something unexpected." For the first time, one of the younger council members, small and insectoid, tilted its head. Its compound eyes reflected curiosity, as if trying to see through his words to the truth behind them. "What makes you think we will listen?" it asked in a high, clicking voice. "Because curiosity cannot be forced," the human said. "It comes naturally. And because your empire has lasted so long by being intelligent. I believe intelligence includes the ability to learn, even from a species you consider inferior." The queen hissed, a sound that vibrated through the chamber. "Bold words. But bold words are easy to speak. Can you back them with reason?" The human nodded. "Yes, I am ready to answer any question you have, to explain every argument I made in my writing, to defend it with logic and evidence." The queen's claws tapped the floor. "Very well. The trial begins." She gestured to the council. "Ask him anything. Challenge his words. Let us see if a human mind is truly as fragile as his body." For hours the questioning began. Each council member posed questions designed to test not only knowledge but reasoning, ethics, and resilience. Some questions were straightforward. Why should any species risk conflict by speaking of equality? Some were subtle, philosophical, testing his ability to think under pressure. What is the value of a life compared to an empire? Some were cruel, designed to provoke fear and doubt. If you fail, your world may be punished. Will you still insist on your beliefs? The human answered each question with patience and honesty. He did not hide fear, but he did not let it control him. He explained that equality was not weakness, that truth and understanding were worth risk, and that fear should not dictate morality. With every answer, a few eyes in the chamber began to shift, some in admiration, some in unease. He could feel a subtle change in the air, an acknowledgement, however small, that perhaps the human mind was not so fragile after all. At one point, a council member, enormous and serpent-like, coiled around a hovering platform. Its voice was low and rumbling, almost like rolling thunder. "You claim your species can survive with ideas alone, but you have no fleet, no weapons capable of conquest, no shields against my fire. How do you expect to defend these words?" The human considered for a moment. "Weapons are tools, but ideas are tools too. A fleet can destroy cities, but it cannot inspire courage, it cannot teach lessons, it cannot prevent mistakes before they happen. A shield may protect the body, but understanding protects the future. Even without weapons, a species that thinks, questions, and learns can survive and grow." A whisper went through the council. It was subtle, almost inaudible to anyone not paying attention, but the human noticed it. The words he had written, the ones that had drawn the queen's fury, were beginning to take root. Curiosity was spreading, a dangerous thing in an empire that had survived by suppressing challenge. Hours passed. The questions grew sharper, the scrutiny more intense. Yet the human remained. He stumbled at times, paused to think, but never wavered in his resolve. When he did not know an answer, he admitted it honestly, showing humility without weakness. Each admission of truth, each clear argument, slowly transformed the perception of the council. What had begun as mockery and suspicion was now tempered with respect, though few would admit it openly. The queen's eyes were fixed on him, watching every movement, every answer. Her claws twitched with irritation. She could not understand it. How could such a small, fragile creature maintain composure under the weight of the galaxy's most powerful scrutiny? Something about the human's courage was infectious, dangerous. The very concept of an unbroken human mind threatened the order she had maintained for centuries. Finally, the questioning paused. A young council member, small and almost overlooked, floated forward, its voice almost a whisper. If your species were given the choice to remain silent, to obey, would you still speak? The human's gaze met the alien's. Yes, he said without hesitation, because silence is a kind of surrender, and obedience without thought is slavery. I cannot accept that for my species nor for any other. Words, even when they bring danger, are freedom, the council murmured. The words were simple, yet they carried weight, resonating in a way the aliens were not used to. The queen hissed in frustration, pacing slightly. Enough, she said. The trial continues, but I see the seeds of rebellion in your logic, human. Do not think I will tolerate it. I do not wish to provoke, the human replied calmly. I only wish to speak the truth. The council remained in silence for a long time, contemplating. Some of the older members, creatures whose lifespans spanned centuries, exchanged glances that revealed concern. The idea that a single human, unarmed and alone, could sway thought was alarming. It was unprecedented. The human realized something important in that moment. The trial was not just about him defending his words. It was about showing that a small species could stand against the greatest power in the galaxy and not just survive, but be heard. The very act of speaking, of raising a hand when asked, was more powerful than any weapon. He could feel it, a spark of something larger than himself, spreading quietly among the council members. The queen's gaze hardened. You may have survived the first round of questions, human, she said, her tone sharp. But this is only the beginning. I will not allow your words to undermine centuries of order. You will face tests beyond knowledge, tests of morality, of courage, of loyalty. You will be watched. Every move will be judged. I understand, the human said, his voice steady. And I am ready. The queen's many eyes narrowed. See that you are. Your species has not faced anything like what awaits you. One false step, and all you have said will be forgotten in fire. As the human was escorted to a small chamber near the council, he felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on him. But beneath the fear was a strange sense of pride. He had not just survived the queen's wrath. He had made her listen. He had made her pause. And more importantly, he had begun to show others, beings far stronger and older than humanity, that courage and truth could stand where weapons and fear had dominated for centuries. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath. He knew the coming test would be harder, more dangerous, and perhaps even impossible to survive. But he also knew something fundamental. The human spirit, when willing to speak and stand, was not so easily broken. The challenge ahead was enormous, but he had already crossed a threshold. He had already raised his hand, and in the quiet, almost imperceptible shift of the council's demeanor, he realized something else. He was not alone. Some eyes in the chamber, small, hesitant, curious, were no longer just watching. They were listening. The trial had truly begun, and the first victory, subtle as it was, belonged to the human. The chamber where the human now waited was smaller, but still intimidating in its alien design. It was circular, with walls that seemed to ripple like liquid glass. Strange symbols floated along the surface, shifting constantly as if alive, and the air hummed faintly with energy. The human could feel it pressing against his skin, vibrating with a kind of intelligence he did not yet understand. This was not a room meant for comfort. It was meant for judgment, testing, and exposure. The door slid open silently, revealing a new set of council members. They were different from the ones he had faced before, larger, older, and even more unusual in appearance. Some had bodies made of intertwined metal and bone. Some had eyes that glowed with inner fire. Some were so enormous that the human had to look up constantly. Their gazes were not merely observing. They were probing, as if trying to look inside his mind. One of the largest stepped forward, a being whose skin appeared translucent, revealing complex patterns of light moving inside. Its voice was deep, echoing off the walls. You have survived the initial challenge, human. Few have, but knowledge alone does not prove worthiness. We will test your morality, your courage, and your ability to inspire. The human nodded. I am ready, he said. His voice, though small compared to the alien thunder, carried a confidence born of necessity. He had come this far by relying on truth, logic, and courage, and he would continue to do so. The first test was simple in appearance but complex in nature. A simulation materialized in the center of the chamber, holographic and lifelike. It showed a distant planet under attack. Alien forces were invading and the inhabitants were fleeing. The council asked, "If you had the power to intervene, how would you act?" The human studied the scene carefully. He did not rush. "I would protect the innocent first," he said. "Weapons can stop attackers temporarily, but lasting peace requires negotiation, understanding, and preparation. I would use any opportunity to prevent unnecessary loss of life before engaging in conflict." A murmur passed through the council. Most species in the Dominion believed power alone solved problems. Mercy was considered weakness. Yet the human spoke as if it were the natural choice, unafraid of consequences. The second test was more personal. The human was shown visions of his own planet, Earth. It was under threat from environmental collapse, war, and political turmoil. Would you sacrifice your own people to save a larger number of lives elsewhere? One elder asked, its many arms floating in the air as if balancing invisible scales. The human took a deep breath. "I would never see my people suffer for nothing, nor allow them to be sacrificed blindly. But if there were a clear, fair way to save more lives while protecting my species, I would act. The goal is not victory or survival alone. The goal is moral responsibility. Every life has value, and we must weigh that carefully." The council fell silent. The human's answers were not just correct, they were unexpected. They revealed a way of thinking that was different from the rigid logic of the Dominion. His species did not rely solely on strength or obedience. Humans thought, questioned, and weighed morality against consequence. That was a dangerous quality in the eyes of the council, yet one that could also be powerful. Hours passed as the tests became increasingly intricate. He was shown impossible scenarios where every choice seemed to lead to suffering. Some aliens tried to trick him with illusions of power, offering him control over planets if he abandoned his principles. Others created simulations of fear, showing destruction and pain that might shake any mind. Each time the human remained steady. He spoke calmly, weighing options, acknowledging consequences, and refusing to betray his beliefs. Some of the council members leaned forward, intrigued. A few whispered among themselves, their clicks and hums conveying something the human could not understand. But he sensed curiosity growing. His presence, his words, were having an effect. Then came the final part of the trial. The chamber shifted, reshaping into a battlefield. Holographic enemies appeared, and the human was told to lead a small force in combat. Many of the council believed this would be the point where he failed. Humans were not trained soldiers, not compared to the Dominion's elite. Yet he surprised them. He moved with speed and intelligence, using the environment to his advantage, coordinating maneuvers with precision and anticipating enemy actions. Not because he was stronger, but because he thought differently. He improvised, adapted, and inspired the holographic forces under his command. It was not perfect and mistakes were made, but he succeeded where others might have relied purely on brute strength. The council members were silent, watching with growing disbelief. One elder whispered to another, "The human mind. It adapts, it survives, it inspires." The comment spread quietly among them, a dangerous realization. They had believed strength alone ensured dominance. The human had shown them a new form of power, courage, intelligence, and the ability to influence without weapons. After the trial, the human stood in the center of the chamber, breathing heavily but smiling faintly. The council was still observing, evaluating, and calculating. The queen, watching from her throne, hissed in frustration. Her plans to intimidate and control had not succeeded. Instead, a single human had stood firm, and even the council, creatures of immense power, could not deny the force of his presence. A younger council member, small and almost shy, floated forward. "You endure more than expected," it said, its voice hesitant. "Your species, it is different. You are fragile yet unbroken, small yet powerful in thought." The human nodded, feeling a strange connection. "We survive by thinking, by learning, and by standing together. Strength alone is not enough. Ideas, courage, and compassion are what endure." Some members of the council exchanged glances, the beginning of recognition dawning in their ancient minds. The human had survived not by weapons or shields, but by qualities they had long dismissed: morality, intellect, and the courage to act despite fear. The Queen's eyes were fixed on him, narrowing. Her hiss was quiet now, but her fury was contained. She realized that this human was not just an individual. He was a symbol, a spark that could ignite change if not crushed. For centuries, the Dominion had maintained control through fear and power. Now they were confronted with a mind unbound by fear, a species unbroken by intimidation. "You have survived this stage," the Queen said finally, her voice sharp but tinged with curiosity. "But do not think your victories here change your fate. Your trial is not over. The greatest challenges are yet to come, and they will test the limits of your mind, your courage, and your soul." The human straightened, looking at her without fear. "I understand, and I am ready for whatever comes." Even as he spoke, he could sense that something subtle had shifted in the council. A few members leaned forward, their curiosity more open now. They were beginning to see the value in the human approach: adaptability, thoughtfulness, and the courage to face impossible odds. The very act of standing firm had begun to challenge centuries of assumptions. The Queen hissed once more, retreating slightly, but her attention did not leave him. She knew that this human had changed the balance of perception in the council chamber. He had survived tests that others would have failed. He had demonstrated a strength that could not be measured in muscle or claws but in thought, conviction, and bravery. As he was led back to a small chamber for rest, the human allowed himself a brief moment to breathe. He was tired, yes, but not defeated. Every question, every test, every challenge had strengthened him. He had learned more about the Dominion and their mindset, and he had proven that humans could not be underestimated. The journey ahead would be harder, the trials even more dangerous. But he had seen something important. The power of a single determined mind could be greater than any weapon. And as he closed his eyes for a brief rest, he realized that he had begun to change the way even the greatest beings in the galaxy viewed humanity. The trial was far from over, but the first victories had been won, not with fire or steel, but with courage, intelligence, and the unyielding human spirit. The days that followed the trial were tense. The human was not allowed to leave the council chambers, but he was given time to rest, to eat, and to recover. Even in this confinement, he noticed subtle changes in the way the aliens treated him. Some avoided looking at him, as though afraid his words could pierce their thoughts. Others lingered nearby, curiosity glinting in their alien eyes. For the first time, he realized that his survival was not just about answering questions, it was about influence. Ideas once spoken could spread quietly like seeds carried by the wind. The Queen observed everything. She had not intended for a human to last so long, to endure so much, or to leave even a trace of doubt in the minds of her council. Her hisses echoed in the halls as she pondered her next move. She could destroy him with a thought, obliterate the record of his audacity and end the threat before it grew. But something about the human unsettled her. He was small yet unbroken, weak yet clever, fragile yet inspiring. To crush him would be simple, but to ignore him was impossible. The next stage of the trial was announced. The council would test not only the human's mind, but his ability to lead and influence others. A simulation was prepared, showing a colony of species oppressed by a tyrannical governor. The human was asked to offer guidance and strategy, but without weapons, armies, or coercion. He was to rely solely on intelligence, reasoning, and diplomacy. He stepped into the simulation, studying the holographic colony with careful eyes. The inhabitants were frightened, confused, and desperate. The governor's forces were strong, well-armed, and cruel. At first glance, any normal approach would have led to disaster. Yet the human saw opportunities. He identified weaknesses in the system, points where compassion could be shown, where trust could be built. He spoke to the holographic leaders, showing them ways to organize safely, protect their people, and negotiate with the oppressors. Hours passed, and slowly, the colony began to respond. The holographic inhabitants followed his guidance, implementing strategies that minimized casualties and increased morale. It was not a perfect victory, but it was a success beyond what the council expected. A single human, without armies or weapons, had influenced entire populations through logic, empathy, and courage. The council observed in stunned silence. Some whispered, others clicked and hummed in disbelief. A few younger members exchanged glances, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. The human was extraordinary. He had proven a power they had never fully recognized. Leadership was not only about strength, it was about vision, insight, and the ability to inspire others. The Queen's claws tapped the floor with irritation. She had hoped this stage would be his undoing. Yet again he had emerged stronger. Her eyes glimmered with fury, but she kept her voice calm. "You are clever, human," she said, her many gaze points fixed on him. "But cleverness alone will not protect you. You will face challenges where words are useless, where only action, strength, and survival matter. Do you understand?" "I understand," the human said, his voice steady. "And I will do my best to meet every challenge, not just for myself, but for my species and for the truth." The next trial began without warning. The chamber transformed again, this time into a vast dark expanse. Shadows moved along the walls and strange, unnatural noises filled the air. The human realized he was no longer dealing with simulations. This was real physical challenges designed to test courage, agility, and adaptability. Creatures materialized from the darkness, enormous and terrifying, their forms shifting as they moved. The human did not panic. He had faced fear before, and he knew that survival depended not only on strength but on observation, quick thinking, and calmness under pressure. He dodged, ran, and used the environment to his advantage, moving with a combination of instinct and careful planning. He was not the strongest, but he was unpredictable, and unpredictability, he realized, was a kind of strength in itself. The creatures pursued relentlessly, yet he managed to outmaneuver them, leading them into traps and obstacles created by the terrain itself. Each narrow escape, each clever maneuver, strengthened his confidence. The council observed quietly, some unable to hide their astonishment. Here was a species that had evolved for survival, not just through physical might, but through intelligence, creativity, and resilience. As the trial continued, the human began to notice something extraordinary. A few of the creatures, once aggressive, hesitated. They slowed their attacks as if confused by his strategy. The council leaned forward, studying the interaction. Slowly, a realization spread among them. Humans could influence not only other species through words and ideas, but even control the environment and its dangers through ingenuity. Hours passed, and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him. Pain, fear, and fatigue pressed against him from all sides, yet he refused to surrender. He relied on observation, careful planning, and the ability to anticipate movements, adapting constantly. By the end, he had survived every attack, every obstacle, every test of physical and mental endurance. The chamber returned to its original form, and the council members floated silently, observing the human. Their expressions were mixed: astonishment, admiration, and a hint of fear. The Queen hissed, pacing slightly. Her plans to intimidate had failed again, yet she could not ignore the growing influence of the human. He had proven not only intelligence and courage, but resilience and adaptability, the hallmarks of true strength. "You have exceeded expectations," one elder said, its voice trembling slightly. "Your species. It is remarkable. Small, fragile, yet capable of enduring trials that would crush others. You think differently, act differently, and survive differently. That is dangerous." The human nodded, aware of the weight of their words. "Dangerous only if ignored," he said softly. "Otherwise it is simply life." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "You speak boldly," she hissed, "and you have survived challenges designed to break you. But the greatest test is yet to come. You will face situations that will challenge your loyalty, your compassion, and your very identity. Do you understand the gravity of what awaits?" "I do," the human replied without hesitation. "And I am ready." In the quiet that followed, the human realized something vital. The trials were not merely tests of strength or intelligence. They were lessons in understanding, observation, and influence. Every action he had taken, every strategy he had devised, had demonstrated that humans could survive, adapt, and even inspire in ways the Dominion had not anticipated. The Queen's eyes glimmered with an unspoken acknowledgement. She knew that the human had begun to change perceptions, even within the council. His victories were subtle but undeniable. Influence was a kind of power she had underestimated, and humans, she now understood, wielded it in ways unlike any species she had encountered. As the human was led back to a chamber for rest, he reflected on the trial so far. He had faced impossible odds, outwitted the council's expectations, and survived challenges designed to break him physically and mentally. Yet he had not only survived, He had begun to change the minds of those who observed him. For the first time, he realized that the Dominion's greatest fear was not a human fleet or weapon, but the human mind itself. Ideas, courage, and ingenuity could do what armies and empires could not. And in that realization he felt a quiet triumph. The road ahead would be harder. The trials would become more dangerous, more personal, more challenging to his morals and his courage. But he knew one truth that no test could take away. Humans were more than their physical weakness. They were thinkers, learners, and survivors. And when faced with overwhelming odds, they could inspire even the most powerful beings in the galaxy to reconsider their assumptions. The human rested, preparing for the final stage of the trial. He understood that his journey was far from over, but he also understood that every trial, every challenge, every question had strengthened him and revealed the hidden power of humanity. And as he closed his eyes, he allowed himself a brief moment of pride. He had faced fear, overcome challenges, and begun to show the Dominion that courage, intelligence, and compassion could triumph where weapons alone could not. The greatest tests were still ahead, but he had learned one enduring truth. Even the smallest hand raised in defiance could shape the course of the galaxy. The hall was vast and cold, stretching higher than any human could imagine, with walls of shining crystal that reflected colors humans had no names for. Light bounced off the surfaces in sharp angles, casting strange shadows that moved like living creatures. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the faint hum of energy that seemed to pulse from the walls themselves. Hundreds of beings, each unlike anything on Earth, gathered inside. Some had scales that shimmered like liquid metal. Others had wings folded tightly against their backs, and a few had shapes that defied logic, with eyes in impossible places and limbs that bent the wrong way. All of them were silent, their attention fixed on the center of the hall, where the alien queen perched on a throne that seemed carved from a single, enormous diamond. She was enormous, taller than any human could hope to be, and her presence alone made the air feel thick with command. Her eyes were many, shifting and moving independently, giving her an unsettling awareness of everything at once. Her claws clicked against the crystalline floor as she held a sheet of paper, or something like it. Humans would have called it paper, but it felt different, almost alive in her grasp. Her gaze fell on it, and for a moment she seemed enraged. "Who wrote this?" she screamed, her voice so loud that it reverberated in the chest of every being present. The sound was not just heard, it was felt, like a hammer striking the floor of the mind itself. Silence followed. The hall was so quiet that even the smallest rustle of movement seemed like a shout. No one dared to answer. Most of the aliens had never seen anything like this. Humans were known to be strange, yes, but bold enough to reach the queen herself? That was unheard of. All eyes, including the queen's many gaze points, shifted to the source of the audacity. A small figure stood near the entrance, hesitant but not fleeing. It was a human, one of the first ever allowed into the Dominion's inner halls. Unlike the others, he was not armored in shining exoskeletons or carrying energy weapons. He had only his uniform, a simple design, and the air of someone who had learned long ago that courage was sometimes louder than firepower. His hands trembled slightly as he raised one in the air. I did, he said, his voice small but steady enough that everyone heard it. Gasps spread through the crowd. Some of the aliens leaned forward in shock. Others recoiled as if the human had spoken a curse. The queen's many eyes focused on him, her pupils narrowing like knives. "You dare?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom and disbelief. "You dare to place your species above your station and write this?" The human swallowed, trying to steady himself. He could feel the pressure of 1,000 alien stares, some curious, others hostile, and the weight of the entire Dominion seemed to press down on him. But he did not shrink. "I wrote what I believe. Nothing more, nothing less," he said, keeping his voice calm despite the pounding of his heart. The queen's claws clenched around the sheet, crumpling it slightly, and the sound made the human flinch. The words he had written, words that spoke of equality, freedom, and the possibility that even a lesser species could contribute to the galaxy, were now a tangible challenge to her power. She had ruled for centuries, and in her view no one, no matter how clever, had the right to question her or her empire. "Words are meaningless to me," she said slowly, her tone like ice forming around fire. "Yet you, small one, have chosen to use them as weapons. You could have chosen obedience, safety, silence. Instead, you chose defiance." "I did," the human admitted. His voice did not waver. Because silence would have been easier, but easier is not always right. My species has survived by learning, by speaking, by questioning. I cannot unlearn what I know, and I cannot unwrite what I have written. A ripple of murmurs passed through the assembly. Some of the aliens whispered among themselves, their voices a strange mix of clicks, hums, and hisses. The idea that a human, so small and fragile compared to their massive armored forms, could speak with such courage and logic was unsettling. They had been trained to see humans as curious but weak. Now one human stood unflinching in front of the most powerful being in the galaxy, and that perception began to shift. The Queen leaned forward, her multiple eyes narrowing. "You are bold," she said almost thoughtfully. "Or foolish. Perhaps both. Did you truly think your words would reach me unchallenged?" The human met her gaze without turning away. "I did not expect them to go unchallenged," he said. "I expected them to be questioned. That is how truth becomes stronger. That is how understanding spreads. And I am ready to answer any question you have." Her many eyes blinked in unison, a movement so synchronized it made the human dizzy just to look at it. She leaned back on her throne, considering. She could have destroyed him instantly, snapped his body in half with a thought. But there was something in his calmness that made her hesitate. It was not respect, it could not be, but it was curiosity. Something about him refused to break, and curiosity was dangerous to the Queen. Dangerous enough to make her pause. "You will answer," she said finally, a slight hiss at the end of the sentence. "You will stand before my council, before my scholars and philosophers. They will test your mind, your logic, your beliefs. If you fail, you will be destroyed and every record of your audacity erased." The human nodded. "I understand." The Queen's claws tapped the floor, a slow, deliberate rhythm that seemed to shake the entire hall. "Then follow me," she said, and the human stepped forward, keeping his posture straight. Each step echoed in the chamber, a small human against a 1,000-year empire, yet he did not falter. As he walked, he could feel eyes on him from every direction. He felt fear, of course, but he also felt something else. Pride. Pride that, even in the face of such overwhelming power, he had the courage to raise his hand, to speak his truth, and to step forward when asked. The path to the inner council chamber was longer than he expected, winding through corridors of crystal and metal, past alien guards who whispered among themselves. Some stared at him openly, others tried to mask their curiosity. It was the first time he realized the enormity of what he had done. Not just one human, not just one word, but the act of challenging the Queen herself had already begun to ripple through the empire. By the time he reached the chamber, he was tired but resolute. The doors opened to reveal the council, beings even more terrifying than the ones in the throne hall. They were enormous, their heads covered in ridges and horns, their eyes glowing faintly with intelligence and power. Scrolls floated around them, pulsing with energy, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and metal. "Present yourself," the Queen commanded, and he stepped forward. He did not know what awaited him. He only knew one thing. His words had reached the Queen, and now he had the chance to show that humans were more than fragile bodies and quick hands. They had a mind, and in that mind there was courage, creativity, and an unwillingness to be silenced. And in that moment, as the council studied him with suspicion, and the Queen watched with something approaching disbelief, he understood the truth that had carried him this far. Sometimes, the smallest hand raised in defiance could carry the heaviest weight in the galaxy. The chamber fell silent again. Waiting, the human took a deep breath. His trial, his real challenge, was just beginning. But he would not step back. Not now, not ever.